All right, welcome again, my friends. This is the second part of our study today. We're taking a look at the world of Agile. Now, for those who may not have done this already, I want to encourage you to look at the Agile Manifesto values and principles before coming into Scrum. The Agile Manifesto is really all about customer satisfaction, customer focus, team satisfaction, and so on. But coming into Scrum, this is a way for us to take the Agile Manifesto and pragmatize our philosophies through practices. Thing to remember about Scrum, it's based on three pillars: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. We want to be open, honest, and transparent, giving visibility to those responsible for the outcome of the project so that at any time they can see where we are. We also want to continuously inspect, not just at the end of the sprint, but every day, the daily scrum that we do for 15 minutes is also an opportunity for inspection of sorts. And lastly, adaptation. The idea is that you don't just inspect, but you also adapt. Here's an example of how it could work. These people that I have here on the screen are stakeholders. And these stakeholders are looking for a team to build a video game. They want the video game machine. They want the game to be engaging. So they've got all of these ideas. These are in the form of post-it notes. Doesn't have to be post-it notes. In the real world, it could be anything. It could be an Excel file with a list of things they want. But we call this stuff, this list of things they want, we call it who remembers? Everything they're looking for. What do we call that? Big
Stories.
So we could say those post-its are stories. Now, when you put all of them together,
Backlog.
a backlog, thank you, product backlog, you got it. Now, this product backlog has everything, but we can't work on everything at once. So we need to have an event where we can decide what to work on. So we have an event where we carve out a relevant chunk of what we are going to be working on within the sprint. And by sprint, I just mean a time box. The sprint is a time box within which we work. Who can tell us what is the event where we decide what we're going to do within the sprint? Do you remember? What's it called? It's an event. Sorry, say that again.
Done sprint.
So the sprint is the actual container, but the very first thing you do is
Sprint planning.
You got it, sprint planning. That's the one. So from sprint planning, we get a subset of the product backlog. What is that called? Does anyone remember?
Sprint backlog.
Beautiful. It's a sprint backlog. The sprint backlog helps us to stay focused during the sprint. And the other things in the product backlog, that's fine. We know those are there, but that will be worked on some other time. Right now, we're going to be working on the sprint backlog items. The sprint backlog items, the philosophy is we as the team are pulling these items to ourselves. We are the people saying, yeah, I'll work on that. This can be done here. We'll work on that. I'll work on that. So it becomes a personalized thing. Sometimes you could work in pairs or you could work singly. In the world of Scrum, Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland, the co-creators, they're very specific about the time box. And they tell you that the sprint can be no more than how many weeks?
No
Who
more
remembers?
than
Weeks,
four.
2 weeks, from 2 weeks to
So it could be 2 weeks, but what is the maximum? Do you remember the
Four.
maximum number?
4.
4, you got it. Not more than 4 weeks, Generally, a lot of companies, the sweet spot is 2 weeks. Beautiful. I'm glad you remember that. Okay. Every day, the team will meet for a 15-minute meeting. Do you remember what that meeting is called?
Stand up.
So they call it a daily stand-up in a lot of circles, but in the Scrum guides, they're very specific about the name. Does anyone remember what they call it specifically?
Daily Scrum event.
Daily Scrum, you got it. The daily Scrum, and it's 15 minutes. Do you know why they make it 15 minutes?
So you can be standing for the 15 minutes
So why do people stand? Do you know why they stand? What's the
make
general idea?
to make it quickly as quick as possible.
Very good, to make it quick, because no one wants to stand around for 1 hour or even 30 minutes. So the idea is that, well, we just stand around, keep the energy up, and let's just move and let's have accountability. Now, if you can tell me one thing that the daily Scrum is not, do you remember from the class what I said? The daily Scrum is not a what? A dash meeting. What is that word? The daily Scrum is not a, who remembers?
Not a report meeting. Right.
So
Not a
it's very
status
good.
meeting?
You got it. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. I love it. It's not like a reporting meeting. It's not a status meeting. That's the word, status meeting. It's not a status meeting. Very good. Now, the daily Scrum instead is a planning meeting. Does anyone remember the general 3 questions asked in the daily Scrum? What are the 3 questions that the team generally answers to? You remember?
Yeah, what was done, what is to be done, and how.
Good. You got
How
it.
we-
Yeah. What was done? Yeah. So that's fine. What have you done since our last meeting to move us towards the spring goal? That's it. What was done? Good. And then what are you going to do today to move us towards the goal? That's good. What's the last question?
How it will be done. How?
The how doesn't necessarily come in, except it's part of
Who
what-
will do it? Or
It's so the who is already answered by the person speaking. So the person speaking is the one who will give the update. But there's one more question.
Isn't it obstructions?
Yes. What do we call those obstructions in Agile? What's the word?
Impediments.
Impediment. Well done. And it's important that you remember these terminologies because they could show up. So you want to ask, what are the impediments that are blocking you? This information is understood by the Scrum Master. If they are there in a meeting, whatever the case, that information should funnel to the Scrum Master. And then the Scrum Master should take action to remove the impediments, obstacles, and blockers. Okay. Now, somewhere in the middle of the sprint, there is another event that happens, but this event is not one of the formalized events. It is where the product owner works with the team to shave down or break apart, if you will, some of the backlog items to better understand them and to better decide the order of things, maybe which ones could be done in the next sprint and so on. Do you remember what that event is called?
Backlog refinement?
Beautiful. Backlog refinement. Well done, Chris. Good, good, good. Backlog refinement. So backlog refinement takes place in the Scrum Guide. It is not recognized as a formal event, but the product owner is encouraged to do this as just part of their routine. At the end of the sprint, we end up deriving what we were working on. What do we call that output at the end of the sprint? Who remembers?
Sprint review event?
So there's an event. So an event is going to happen after this for sure. But what do we call this thing that we've derived, like the deliverable, the increment of the deliverable? Do you
Oh,
remember
it's
that?
potentially shippable increment?
Beautiful. It's called a PSI. In some
Yeah.
circles, other people just refer to it as increment. Beautiful. Then we have our sprint review. And the sprint review is where our stakeholders take a look at what was done for that iteration. Very good. What happens after the sprint review?
Retrospective.
Awesome. It's the retrospective. The retrospective is where we look in the rearview mirror to see what went well, what can we do differently, what do we need to improve on? And there might just very well be one or two items that you can improve on immediately, or maybe they need to go into the backlog for consideration for longer rollout. But this is a general idea of Scrum. And that's why we say the 3-5-3 configuration, okay? So very well done. Just remember that we also have values in Scrum: courage, to do the right thing, to work on the right stuff; focus, we want to be hyper-focused on what we're doing. That's why we recommend that you don't belong to a whole bunch of Scrum teams. I know in the real world, it so happens that we have developers being pulled to different teams, but we generally don't like that. We love to focus on the work of the sprint. We want commitment, we want respect, respecting your team members, and openness, that transparency factor. So again, we have the roles: the product owner. They are part of the team. They are the people who understand the vision. I call them the chief value officer. They are the customer representative, and they're really meant to be prioritizing the backlog. Then we have the Scrum Master, who needs to be all over the process, understand how the team should be following Scrum. They are like a coach for the team. They are not in charge of the team, though. And then we have the developers. When I say team, developers, right? The development team, they're accountable for creating a plan. They decide on the definition of done. They get the work done. They work together. They pair up. They do what they need to do. And last but not least, we have the events. We have the sprint, which is a time box. Could be anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. The sprint is often forgotten, but it's a container in which everything else is. And that pretty much is it. We've talked about the backlog, sprint backlog, product backlog, which is all the work to be done; sprint backlog, which is a subset of the work, which is the work to be done in the sprint. And then we have the potentially shippable increment, or just referred to as increment. And we say potentially shippable because it may not be featured enough, right? So that is one of the big deals in the world of Agile. The other significant things I would say you should know in Agile are understanding the definition of done, which is an agreed upon set of items that must be completed before an increment is considered complete; and the definition of ready, which you can look at as the condition of user stories before you begin working on them. During the training, there was an acronym I gave you called the INVEST acronym that helps you remember the definition of ready. So you could say a story is ready to be worked on when it meets this criteria: independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small, and testable. Okay. As far as the other minutia in Agile, I would say just open your yellow handout, and as you go through it, a lot of this stuff will come back to you. But for your exam, I would say some of the other pieces you might want to pay a little attention to are things like your burn charts. So your burn down chart, this is an image from the Agile Practice Guide. Your burn chart shows you, what is remaining. Your burn up chart is very similar, but it's flipped on its head and it shows you what has been done. So you do need to see both of these as value add to the world of Agile. And then one of the other things we talked about is planning poker, how you do your estimating, the Fibonacci sequence, Again, you can log into the LMS and just watch these if you need a refresh. And then we talked about affinity estimating, which is the other way you can estimate in the world of Agile, where you have big buckets and you put the stories against the bucket. And then at the end of the day, whoever the facilitator is comes back in and estimates. Okay. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. All right. So I'll go ahead and hit the stop button. Thank you very much for the question. I'm hoping this helps and hoping that puts you on track for your PMP study.